Okay, hi again, everyone. Welcome back to the second session of our second module in Deconstructing Indonesia. Yeah, because my background is in education, so I would like to stretch like the session into like the educational side because one of my research is also in the indigenous education. So yeah, the specific theme for today is from the margin to the center, inspired by bell hooks, toward education for socio-ecological justice and cosmic balance. So we will try to look at how educational system marginalize certain knowledge, including indigenous knowledge. So it's a lot about decoloniality as well. But as we are standing here in Manhattan, New York, I would like to read our land acknowledgement. Yeah, we gather today on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Lenape people, the original stewards of Lenapehoking, which includes Manhattan and the surrounding areas. The Lenape maintained deep relationships with these lands and waters for thousands of years before European colonization. And we acknowledge the ongoing displacements of indigenous people and recognize that this presentation about indigenous knowledge system takes place on land that was taken through violence and broken treaties. And we commit to honoring indigenous sovereignty, supporting indigenous-led movements, and learning from indigenous wisdom as we work toward justice. All right, so here we go. Yeah, as we can see now, I think we can say that we are now facing like a crisis in this world. We as in human and more than human. We saw like climate catastrophe, we saw biodiversity collapse, water contamination, displacement of indigenous people now still happening in Indonesia as well, in Kalimantan, in Papua. There's also like the deepening epistemic violence and many other things. And this crisis are interconnected with the crisis of education because we know that during our schooling era, we didn't really learn about what's happening outside of the school. And yeah, not only in the sense that schooling has failed to produce environmental literacy or scientific understanding, but more in that dominant educational system have actively reproduced the colonial logics that created this crisis in the first place. So I will take like some Mignolo understanding about coloniality as well. Etienne already touched some of these concepts in the previous session. And what's concerning is not only like the education in the whole system, but specifically in the STEM education, which our government, or I think all government in this world, tried to push as it is positioned as the solution to societal problems in this world. But actually, STEM has historically served as an instrument of coloniality. And what is coloniality? Does anyone want to answer? I'm testing those who are already in the first session. What's coloniality? How can STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics become the instrument of coloniality? Anyone on the Zoom? Yeah, it's still 7:30 probably in the morning. So yeah, to refresh, coloniality is the ongoing system of power that reproduce hierarchies between colonizer and colonized, between human and nature, between reason and emotion, knowledge and wisdom, etc. And this rhetoric of modernity characterizes mainstream STEM education in this world now, we see, where it generates what the colonial theories identify as the logic of oppression and exploitation. So we will look more into this. Yeah, this modernity rhetoric depends upon establishing a divide between nature and culture, where it positions nature as a free gifts available for human extraction and consumption. So this concept of free gifts is interesting because in like the modern economic discourses, we saw like Marxist economists talking about free gifts. A Barnard professors just wrote a book about free gifts. Alisa Battistoni, it's a great book, would recommend. But yeah, such nature culture divide are constitutive of how schools are structured as well in the modern societies, where learning takes places in indoors, like what we are doing now. It is cold, of course, outside. But I think during the whole K-12 era, our era, we are focusing on the indoor classroom. But it makes us separated from the living ecosystems surrounding us. And not only that, this rhetoric of modernity rhetoric also tries to brainwash us, quote unquote, to understand what counts as valid knowledge and who is authorized to produce this kind of knowledge. And mostly this people who can teach us the subjects are Western, white, male people. We can see even in Indonesian studies or even in indigenous studies, we see a lot of white people talking about indigenous subjects. But yeah, I'm trying to only use like Indonesian written pieces on the uh, indigenous studies in this class. Not everything, but hopefully it, yeah, tries to decolonize our readings as well. And this not nature culture divide isn't happen in Indonesia only, but also globally. I look towards the Ojibwe population in the Midwest of North America, also in Canada, the First Nation. It also happens because we are under the same logic of coloniality, where the territories of the indigenous people are being seized and their knowledge system are being dismissed up until now. We can see, oh, indigenous knowledge is myth. It is superficial. It's like spiritual, only spiritual dimension. It is not logical. But we will look further after this. And yeah, simultaneously, indigenous communities have consistently resisted, regenerated, and reasserted their own pedagogical traditions, grounded in millennium of intimate relational engagement with specific lands of and waters. And these traditions embody different ways of understanding of human belonging, about ecological responsibility, and also the nature of knowledge itself. And Indonesia has its own cultural diversity. Indonesia provides rich examples of indigenous educational system that are sustained across centuries, from the Nusantara philosophy that expressed through gotong royong. We can see it from Java, from and East Nusa Tenggara, everywhere in the Nusantara, to the cosmic orderings that are manifested in traditional settlements across the archipelago, to ritual systems maintaining the socio-cosmic order in Eastern Indonesian societies. So each region has its own cosmological and philosophical treasury that becomes the guidance for each communities to act, to speak, to behave, and it functioning as a living system of education through their embodied participation. So we can see that the indigenous education, up until here, indigenous education is very specific to each land they are living, how they embody it, how the ecology and the harmony works in each place. So it's very different with the modern education, Western education, Western modern education. And yeah, to start, I want to argue that education must move from the margins, centering an understanding of cosmic balance, the recognition that humans exist within the intricate webs of interdependence, reciprocity, and mutual obligation that encompass all beings and the spiritual forces that govern their relationships. So when we can position ourselves not as someone superior rather than other human being or more than human being like our nature, we can hopefully have a better society. We can challenge the oppression, ecological destruction whatsoever, because we have this feel of interconnectedness with other peoples and the uh, everything more than human worlds. But before we look further, uh, we'll have a discussion. How did your own education teach you to think about the relationships between humans and nature? What messages did you receive about who or what nature is? Or you can also answer the second question. Can you identify examples of the nature culture divide in your current educational or professional context? So probably the current condition or probably your past experience when you are still in Indonesia, when you're still in Kampung Halaman. Uh, yeah. Anyone? I'll open the conversation to everyone in the Zoom as well. So yeah, I'm trying for us to reflect because what matters in this decolonial education is everyone has to right to express their beliefs and it's not fault at all. So yeah. And we learn from other people, not from textbooks. Anyone want to try to answer these questions? Derek, you can unmute. Yeah, you can unmute.
I oh sorry. I would say for question one, my exposure to nature, it's only in the natural sciences. And that itself is already quite telling, right? That it's not nature, it's the natural sciences. So it's biology, it's always in a lab. It's never it's never like an actual frog swimming in a pond and hopping from like lily pad to lily pad. It's like a dead frog that you're dissecting. It's always like in this like very controlled, this very it's been transferred from its natural environment to something else that's more yeah, labby, I guess. And so that's sort of like that itself is already a bit of a divide, I guess, with regards to question one. Where it's sort of like, again, you're never engaging with nature directly, and nature is there subjected to the human gaze almost. It's not something, it's something that's you're not like again, the frog isn't hopping, the frog isn't doing its thing, it's dead, it's there for you. It's there for you to like dissect and understand and like do whatever you want with it. Yeah. So I maybe in some sense that is suggestive of how nature is subordinated to the human, although the human is also a part of nature. And that's just I don't know. That's just weird. I watched an anime once that sort of like went into this. That's why I've been thinking about the whole like dialectic. But for question two, I would say not maybe not quite educational or professional, but maybe just in more general with life, like food. Like we don't really know where our food comes from. We don't know who makes it. We don't know how it's made. It's something as simple as like so even cooking itself. Like I think not all of us cook. And I'm reminded of a time where I was hosting a Thanksgiving party And then there's like we invited like 30 to 40 people, and I was cooking like sambal for everyone. And I spent the entire night just like grinding the chilies, and then I was out. I was out for the whole day. I couldn't even fully enjoy the party tomorrow because I was still out. And to me, that's like, wait, this is what goes in? This is not even like growing the chili and harvesting. This is just grinding the chili as you're preparing it. And so I think sort of maybe because there's like this economic division of labor, we don't always know where our things come from. And especially like, I mean, in that example, that's still like human labor, but like when you're like harvesting a chili paddy, that's not just you, that's forces of nature that are not entirely within your control. But I don't want to keep talking, but that's sort of like just a few thoughts I had.
Okay, thank you, Derek. So the follow-up questions for you. How do you feel when you are dissecting the frog and you are seeing from the current perspective? And the second one, what if, oh, someone is talking? No, oh, it's you. No, no, no. And second, if you position yourself as someone who nurtured this cabe, this sambal, from the beginning, what will be your response to it?
So how did I feel dissecting the frog? Um, I I was a very young child. I just wanted to get a good grade. I wasn't being philosophic. Um, but maybe that itself is telling, right? The frog is subordinated to an exam. You only care about the frog in the context of like in the context of like whether you're gonna pass basic biology. Like and maybe that's I don't know, maybe that's telling in its own way. And like how do I feel about like the like if I was like a farmer, I think like we all have this sort of like idealized, romanticized belief in many cases where it's sort of like, oh, I want to go back to a village and I want to like be self-sufficient and grow my own crops. And it's not easy at all. We don't realize how hard it is. So my mom sort of like works in like the poultry industry, and the way she described it is like I'm literally working with shit, like literally shit, like chicken shit. It's not easy because this is like raising a kid is hard. And having a pet is also hard. It's like imagine like raising like 5,000 like chickens or like like chili patties. Chili patties don't breathe, but they're living organisms too. And you sort of have to like think about weather patterns. You have to think about whether it's gonna rain and sort of all of that. And then it gets worse with climate change. And then that's not even thinking about the human factors. Like, well, is like mafia tanah gonna come and seize my land? I don't know. There's just so much. Like we think it's easy, but and I think the fact that we think it's easy speaks to the disconnect that we don't really know how. We forgot how hard it is.
Yes, thank you, Derek. And I think from that short conversation, we can try to imagine what if we try to plan like the cabe itself. What is cabe? Chili. What's it? Chili. Chili ourselves. And now we are buying it very cheap, right? So what happens in between? Like it's hard to grow plants. Not that hard for me, but for a lot of people, it is hard. But what happens in between? So it will makes us questioning a lot about economic, about political situation. So that's where I think education lacks off. And that's where indigenous education teach me when I'm in East Nusa Tenggara. Uh, I lived there for a short time, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. But there's a lot of understanding from the masyarakat adat there about how to cultivate our food, our surroundings, not to mention the ducks, because that's a tradition. But yeah, that's the point. And what's interesting as well is about soil. So I just read like an article, not an article, a paper from Miwa Takeuchi, one of the paper that we used tonight. So she have a project about soil-based education. So she lives in Calgary in Canada. So she's trying to educate people about the history of Calgary. So 100 years ago, this soil that this professor touched are being used to grow a lot of plants, and these plants will be used for animals, etc. But now this soil is being replaced by asphalt to create streets, and now it's being replaced by high-rise buildings. So what's the meaning of this? Sorry. Yeah, what's the meaning of this soil? So she's using the soil to teach people about the history, about the displacement of the indigenous people, about biology, a lot of those things. But she's taking people outside from the classroom, talk about the real soil that people can touch, the people can feel, and the people can understand what happens in that society. So it is one of the, I think, powerful education that I want to take a little bit of the taste here on the first part of this session. We already talked about 30 minutes, sorry. Alsha have a comment. I feel like we weren't taught on menghormati alam in natural sciences, in contrast of what you learn in pramuka or even religion or culture classes. Yeah, that's true. That's should be a problem, but are we thinking about that as a problem now? No, not really. So probably we should think more. Okay, let's continue. I should stop. Else it will be 3 hours. Wait. Okay, so this is the paper from Miwa Takeuchi and Ananda Marin. So they are both researching a lot about indigenous education and yeah, living with indigenous people for 20, 30 years. And there's paper from Megan Bang that we will use too. She's indigenous educators in Northwestern. She's an Ojibwe. So we will try to look about how they are trying to say on education and decoloniality and indigenous. So yeah, so they coined this term, decolonial love. This is a kind of love that resists nature, culture divides, and recognize our responsibilities to all relations and enacts reciprocity while grieving historical oppression and violence. So we are not only talking about the harmony when we are talking about indigenous. We are talking about the oppression that the indigenous people are facing up until now. And this decolonial love is spatial and generative, and it critiques the conditions of coloniality. And it appears in the actions of water protectors who put their bodies on the line to defend the rivers from pipeline constructions or illegal mining in Kalimantan, in Meratus. And they're recognizing water as relative with rights and sovereignty. And this kind of love, this decolonial love, is very dangerous. Because of what? Because it carries real consequences for their life. I hit Meratus before, like several seconds ago. One of the activists in Meratus tries to fight the illegal miners, and he's being killed. He's indigenous. His name is Babanate. So up until now, we are still seeing that this kind of fight, this decolonial love that shows us the oppressions, are a real danger. And the paper also continues that this decolonial love in education means reorienting the purpose of education and the purpose of schooling, but not only the purpose, but also the practices. So rather than reproducing human capital for economic competition, this kind of pedagogy tries to ask, how do we educate humans to live in respectful relations with all our more than human relatives? They also ask, how do we cultivate capacities for noticing, for caring, and defending the web of life on which all beings depend? And it also asks, how do we support students in becoming agents of transformation rather than the perpetuators of extractive colonial system? So it doesn't end up in the schooling, but it is outward looking. Education didn't start on and finish at school, but it is continuously fighting against the system, the oppression. And yeah, this is indigenous relational ontologies, but I think you can just read on the paper to save time. But we can try to translate it in the Indonesian context. So in the Indonesian context, these cosmologies posit orderings of relationships across multiple reality or multiple realms. There's another paper from Platon Camp. They have an analysis of Eastern Indonesian societies that have characteristics including elaborate dual classifications, asymmetric alliance systems, the intrinsic unity of social and cosmological representations. And these cosmologies are maintained through ritual practices and physical spatial arrangements that constitute living systems of education through embodied participation. Again, this is the keyword for decoloniality. Decolonial education is embodiment, is embodied. And the next questions will be, oh, sorry. This is Hudson for stage action model. This is more like the practical ways on the outward looking of the decolonial education, but I think we can skip this as well. But yeah, the Hudson frameworks that teaches us to be more outward looking to the action oriented, it is a good framework for the scaffolding for action oriented curriculum. But if we want to really center indigenous cosmologies, it means that we should reframe how activism works in education. So rather than positioning, rather than position as one educational outcome among others, action emerged from and is grounded in recognition of cosmic responsibility, the understanding that humans have obligations to all beings because all beings are our relations. And here we can see the water protectors in Salisi, in Tidore communities, in Salisi, and also the Tidore communities sustaining their forest ecosystem through sacred practices. We can see Baduy people maintaining customary governance systems that protect their forests. And this is not like the environmental activisms that people are doing now, but it is also an expression of living in right relations with one's relative. After this, we will see how the sacred practices, like what we usually call like myths, is actually tries to defending like the environment. But also the indigenous people have their own regulation, have their own governance systems to maintain like this harmony, cosmic balance. Sorry. And yeah, that's why again, education oriented to this kind of cosmic balance must be embedded for us to recognize the reciprocal obligation of the human beings and more than human beings. Okay. Now we are going to have like a short activity, probably people on the Zoom. So this is like the experiential learning exercise. Step 1. Think of a body of water near where you live or work. A river, lake, ocean, or even a stream or pond. Step 2, what do you know about this water? Where does it come from? Where does it go? Who depends on it? And step 3, how might you approach this water as a teacher rather than as a resource? What could it teach you about your place and your responsibilities? So let's try to look. We are here in Manhattan, probably we can look at Hudson River. Why we cannot use Hudson River? How about the lake? What's lake? Place it, not place it. No, like the one that we use for drinking, the tap water. Saratoga. No, I forgot. Yeah, probably we can ask people on the Zoom. Anyone want to answer and tries to reflect about water? Because water is the one of the most important resources in our lives. We have clean water crisis now, not only in Indonesia, but also in New York, in Manhattan. We almost ran out of clean water last year. Remember? No? We are in that crisis of clean water, but also in East Nusa Tenggara and the dry areas. So I think it's important for us to discuss water. Okay, people on the Zoom who wants to share your understanding, your experiences of water, probably in your place now, you're standing, or back in your home, back in your city, village. Okay, we have Shaila.
Hi, Nathan. Um, no, while you ask this, I'm in Universitas Indonesia, and we have a few lakes in on campus ground. And I've been thinking, looking at the questions, like I don't know where it goes. I don't know where it came from. I don't know if it's man-made or it's a natural lake. Aside from there was a murder like 10 years ago, but nothing, I know nothing about the lake. So it's interesting. And I don't even know if the water that came into my office is from the ground or from the state companies. And yeah, it makes me reflect on the third question. How can it teach me? Because like I take it for granted. All the body of water I pass through, I look at, I cry on the edge of, but I don't really know how it interact with me, as in how it creates life, how it feeds, and what we give back to these bodies of water. Yeah, I think that's my reflection, Nathan.
Thank you so much, Shala. Yes, that's very important. Take it for granted. That's what the main point until the second part of this session, when we are talking about the educational system that we are living for 18 years, K-12 at least, or 22 years after undergraduate. We are far away from the reality from the crisis. And if we look at the very basic necessities in our lives, water, we don't really know, or we don't really care about where does it came from, how it can teach us, etc. One more people. Let's go. We have Dona Niagara Dinata.
Hi, Nathan. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I cannot open my camera.
You're good.
So, thanks for these questions. Originally, I'm from Jambi in Sumatra. Maybe some of us have heard about it. And one of iconic water spaces there is Batanghari River. Maybe most of people know is from South Sumatra, the Musi River, but also in Jambi we have that one, also the longest one. And I know about the water is from the local conversations, not from the schools, like how we use that. And when I was a kid, it back to in the 90s, we still use that for our resource for drinking water. So the PDAM, the company water, use that. And when I go back, so I travel around having education outside of my city. When I go back, I'm quite shocked because now the water now have a different functions. It's to deliver mining sources, which affect a lot of the water. And I couldn't find the fish that I used to eat when I was a kid in my home anymore because it's not there anymore. So that what I know now about the water and having these questions. Thank you for giving the question, Nathan. Same like the another audience before, like that's I took this thing for granted for a long time. Like when things change, I start thinking this is something that we can prevent for a long time ago. Yeah, that's from me.
Thank you for your sharing. And yeah, that's a really big problem. In Indonesia, it's illegal mining, extraction, massive, everywhere. Here in the US, what's the problem of water? Data center. We see a lot of news now about the cities where near like this AI data center where they extract like the clean water, etc. And now it's running out. It's clean water, man. You're using it for capitalism. Also, the illegal mining everywhere. We know the problem. Probably one less people if you want to share or no. Okay, we have Cut Puantizani Pasha.
Hello, I want to share my experience, what I saw in Maldives when I did research there. So there are like some types of islands in Maldives. Let's say compared to Malé is the capital island, and then there will be like inhabited island where like the local people live, and then there will be like island only used for the resorts, and that where the local people cannot go there except they become the guests, something like that. So there are some restriction where they share the same sea water, and then there are like I did the research in heritage, and then well is one of the most important thing that we keep recording over time. And in some of the habitat island, we found that before, like the local government made a lot of wells that stretch along the main road of the islands, but then over time, in the modern modern island planning, they don't have it anymore because people start changing their like the big company, such as Coca-Cola, also one of it. So they make the people to depends on the uh, the mineral water that coming from them, that bring a lot of plastics to the islands also, and it becomes a huge issue. And they have like a transportation issues where everything is using are using boat or ferry. So the weight uh of the stuff that they bring is very important, and because of that they can only bring, it's not like us that where we will have a big gallon at home. They don't have it there, so they have to depends on daily with let's say like the 5 liter of water that is very small, and it creates so many other problems such as like plastics and stuff. And then it's harming their own islands, where they like a lot of islands only have like a very small species, and then they have to share it with like a really bad plastics issues there. And then it's a very different approach that we compare from the past, where the government, like the local government, try to build, like they use a lot of rainwater, and then they also create like a good well systems that it's very rare for us to find it in the current islands in the Maldives. Like they don't really use well water as the as a main source for drinking, because like there are a lot of it in education. It sounds like less good, less like for it's bad for your health. So it's really impact how they live right now.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, I think hopefully we can see the importance of reflecting what's on our daily life, the necessities that we are probably don't really look into previously, because that's what indigenous education teaches me when I live there. Because we are not talking about this philosophical fluffy foo big words, but tries to reflect and understand the historical background of why the crisis is there, the ecological destruction, and how can we try to improve it. So if you look into like each case in these indigenous communities, they also have like the sophisticated technologies to solve these problems. So for example, in East Nusa Tenggara, again, because my only experience of working with indigenous communities is in Nusa Tenggara, they have a lot of like these technologies of tanam air. They have like they are using this bamboo to pump the water, not to pump, to alirin water, and etc. And then came the UN with their sophisticated pumps, electric pumps, and 80% of it doesn't work. They already spent trillions of rupiah. They just dismantle all of these indigenous technologies that are there for hundreds of years. They are just, okay, we are the hero, we will solve everything, and your technology doesn't matter. So it's one of the example of the how coloniality works in indigenous communities. And yeah, I think we can continue to Nusantara philosophy. We are talking about water, we are talking about soil. It's very basic. It's another philosophy that people call basic in Indonesia. It's called gotong royong. And for those who are not Indonesian, gotong royong is this sense of collective consciousness. And this sense of collective consciousness tries to solve collective problems and action. And this principle of gotong royong is grounded in 4 core concepts. If we want to not synthesize, summarize it. The first one, humans do not live alone, but are surrounded by their community, society, and the universe, where they feel themselves as small elements carried by the movement process of the universe. Second, humans are essentially dependent in all aspects of life on others. 3, they must keep trying to maintain good relations with others, driven by the spirit of equality. And the fourth one, they must keep trying to conform, doing the same thing as their community does, driven by the spirit of equality. What do you think? Okay, we have Hestu Prahara here. You can unmute and express your opinion.
Hello, hi. Yeah, try to find the unmute button. It's
Yeah.
I'm using my phone. Yeah. Hi, Nathanael. Yeah, it's kind of I'm reflecting on the way that we use this word lately, and especially if we talk about educations. I have So I'm doing research in East Nusa Tenggara as well, especially in the region of Manggarai, and I found it's a really fascinating phenomenon that I observed there. They have these rituals called Pesta Sekolah, um, especially where they have like a son or daughter that want to continue their education to university, so they will have like this celebration, not like a celebration, it's more like a way of collecting money, so they can get money from not only from their parents and their kin, but also from the whole village. So they will have like this celebration, but the point is to get help from each other. So they call it dodo. So it's basically gotong royong, and it's a collective effort to send one of them to go to school, basically. But it's also interesting to see how like this practice um, is like when we talk about like indigenous and traditional uh, way of life. So these aspirations of sending their kids to modern institutions is already integrated into their tradition, what's so called, um, and it's sometimes I observe that this kind of gotong royong also becomes some sort of a dilemma for them, because they somehow also need cash, and then they have to convert their um, their area, like where they used to plant food, into cash crop, because they will need cash to send their kids, and also to celebrate, and also to help like these rituals, they will also need cash. So it's kind of difficult to identify whether this kind of gotong royong is something that really positive in a way, because at the end of the day, people will end up with some kind of debt into each other, and because of they they entangle into this relation of debt, they will need some kind of cash to pay for the debt that they have with each other. Maybe that's the some kind of reflection that I get from my experience in Manggarai. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hestu. Funny thing is, the next slide is about Manggarai. But actually, you can talk more about this, because this I use like a paper, but you are there physically. But it's totally the same area, Manggarai. But I think we can go to Nata first.
Uh, this made me think. So my background's in applied psychology, so I learned a lot of psychological theories, and one of the main big one at the moment in developmental psychology is called Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems model. And it's just this idea. It doesn't sound crazy to us probably, but it's this new idea apparently that humans grow in a bunch of ecosystems, and we're surrounded, we grow in a community, we grow in social and cultural societies and communities, and that's apparently a new thing in developmental psychology. But then here, gotong royong philosophy is exactly that. It acknowledges it at the forefront. But then going back to your initial first ever question for this thing, where you were asking where what does our current education system, where does it talk about our culture, sorry, our nature and education and the divide. Even in that ecological model, I'm realizing now there is no mention at all of our environment at all. And this model is supposed to be the most recently developed and most concrete way of how we understand how human beings grow and develop in their society.
Oops, I muted someone.
Oh, yeah, that's it. That's all I want to say. It's just
Okay.
crazy to me. Yeah.
Thank you, Nata. yeah, I just learned about this in my psychology class as well. And this probably can shows us that this modern education is not that modern. They're just new, something that we already know hundreds or thousands of years ago. And one interesting point from has to is about the synthesis when you are talking about how people in Manggarai want to send their kids to pursue something outside of their place. And it is, again, not an external thing, but also already synthesized into their traditional customs. And that gave, that makes me, what is it? Thinking about the culturally sustaining pedagogy. So if we try to understand the coloniality in education, sometimes we want to go back and we are not seeing how the current society already being shaped through these times. So we cannot really go back. So for example, like in the Black communities, they want to go back in that era, but that era is still patriarchal. And we cannot go back to that patriarchal era again. So they are trying to, yeah, these terms, culturally sustaining. So we need to be better still. But we'll continue to the Manggarai because it's 8:30. Okay, remind me again if I take too much time. Yeah, this is one of the case study that I find interesting in the paper from Manggarai, East Nusa Tenggara. The principle of gotong royong takes distinct cultural form through arisan pendidikan and the traditional ceremony Wat Wai, which supports modern education while remaining wrapped in traditional ceremony. So the Manggarai language expresses the foundational philosophy Ua Haeng Wulang Langkas Haeng Tala, meaning grow and soar high until you reach the moon and stars in the sky. And this is the expression of hope for the children to be a successful person in the future with education as essential support. And this what why is a cultural right to bid farewell to someone who is living their hometown, either to pursue higher education or having like quote unquote better life. And the ceremony involves ritual components, and it is rooted in spiritual and social systems in Manggarai. So they have like the tuak kapu. Who knows tuak? Derek know tuak. Tuak is really good. So tuak kapu is the greeting with traditional beverage. Tuak is the beverage. Then they have Turamanuk Bakok. It's a prayer chanting an indigenous religion, pleading to Mori Krang, is the supreme being to protect the journey. And Teing Hang, feeding the ancestor. And a specific piece of advice by the parents to their children before they go overseas. Not overseas. What is it called? Keluar kota. Keluar kampung. Perantau. Okay, that's a better word. Lalong bakok du lakom. Lalong rombeng koe du kolem. It means when you leave your hometown, you're like a white chicken. When you return, you will be colorful. And yeah, this kind of ceremony in Manggarai integrates spiritual practices, social practices, and also their educational aspirations. So they are not only confined as we understand the meaning of confined, but they are always progressing. And back to the first definition, the interconnectedness, the reciprocality, etc. So that's the point. Probably Hestu, do you want to add something here as someone who are researching, who is interested in Manggarai?
Yeah, this is actually really touched because I'm currently still doing research about this. This is exactly the ritual part, the dua tuai, so where you give blood to the feet because it represents that you are going somewhere, right? And then tuak bak, and then tuak, and then manuk bakok, and then lalong rombeng. That's really important to understand how the Manggarai, this kind of ritual is something that related to the making of person, right? But then also it's also connected to the way everyone in Manggarai is connected to the logic of death, you know. So basically they have, because this is like arisan, you pay, and then on the other time you will have to pay for another activity. I think the term that I learned, they use pesta sekolah instead of arisan pendidikan. So it's basically like a party. It's really party, and it's interesting to see how sometimes it becomes like a competitions, because like when you have like a good connection, you will gain a lot of money from this activity. But if you have like lack of connection because you are poor, and then lack of social infestation, then you have comparatively lower income from this activity. So there is also some kind of inequality in how this ritual is practiced. So this is something that I think really need to be examined as a practice, not only as just like ritual, but put in the context of inequality and yeah, something like that.
Thank you for sharing again. And yeah, we can continue. 8:35. I still have some more slides. Okay, let's focus. And yeah, next we will move to Tidore. This is one of a interesting example that I found as well, where they shows how spiritual practices and ecological knowledge are integrated into this approaches to environmental protection. So Tidore people have this kind of engagement with forest and ecosystem, and it is grounded in cosmologies that recognize spiritual forces and obligations that are interwoven, interconnected with the material ecological relationships. And this spiritual ecological integration or approach of Tidore communities also manifests in practices like Paca Goya ritual, through which communities maintain sacred relationships with forests and ecosystems. They constitute a system of governance that regulate resource use, maintain biodiversity, and ensure ecosystem regeneration. Similarly, if we go to South Sulawesi, we have Cerekang community, and this shows how sacred mythologies function as repositories of environmental ethics and strategies of conservation. So instead of viewing mythologies as entertainment, or modern people call it primitive attempts at explaining natural phenomena, we can see how sacred mythologies encode environmental principles and guide community regarding resource use. So specifically, there's a myth of Bobeto, a sacred natural site protected by the Cerekang community, where it functions as a story that transmits knowledge about forest protection, the consequences of violating ecological taboos, and responsibilities humans bear toward more than human beings. So the Cerekang people maintain strict prohibitions against harvesting certain plants or disturbing specific forest areas. And these prohibitions can be found in the mythological narratives. And this also shows that mythologies are not opposed to practice environmental management, but we can say that they are like management or mechanism from which knowledge, values, and commitments are transmitted across generations in forms that carry emotional and spiritual thought. Wait. So I hope this can debunk if people still doesn't believe in the sacred mythologies of the indigenous communities and still saying that it is not scientific, it is not everything. Because if you look further, they want to protect, and that's how they protect the environment through 100,000 years. And we who learn STEM, doing nothing for the ecological destructions that they protect for thousands of years. So that's why education that are grounded in indigenous cosmologies would recognize story and mythologies as a crucial pedagogical forms through which communities transmit ecological knowledge and ethical commitments. And that's why it is important to recentering the margins. We touched a bit about governance, and it is not only in Tidore. We also can see similar governance system in Baduy, people of West Java. They have maintained system of customary environmental governments for centuries as well. They have this practice called awik-awik, Baduy awik-awik, a system of customary law containing principles related to prohibitions, obligations, and forest preservation systems. And it emerged and is continuously regenerated through Baduy communities' intimate engagement with their forests. So if there's a changes in the forest, they will change through. And the contribution of local wisdom of the Baduy community to nature conservation involves understanding how this customary law embodies ecological perspective combined with ethical and spiritual commitments. And this awik-awik regulates forest use in ways to ensure forest regeneration, also maintain biodiversity and prevent degradation that we are trying to fight with our own understanding. So what if we fight with their understanding who've been living there for thousands of years? Again, we can recentering the marginalized voices. Discussion break. Another discussion. We have critical reflection. Okay, the question number one, the awik-awik systems have protected forests for centuries through community governance. How does this compare to contemporary environmental protection approaches you're familiar with? Carbon dating, no. You are using private jet and you are buying this carbon dating. Or question number two, what role do spiritual beliefs and practices play in environmental stewardship? Should education engage this dimension? The third question, how might gotong royong principles apply to addressing environmental challenges in your own context? So let's try to make what we discussed previously into our situation. Anyone? You can raise your hand. Nasser can answer. As someone who will work in the ecological area, or people on the Zoom, let's try to reconnect. I'll give 1 minute, or I will choose. No one can escape. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay.
So I actually work on job right now. And a lot of like, at least in the US, like a lot of the climate field is really. Okay. Yeah, so a lot of like the climate field in the US is really pushing for renewable energy as like the #1 solution to the climate issue and climate change. which is, you know, a solution, but obviously like here based on like what we've been learning here and also just like what we've learned from indigenous communities is that like like protecting indigenous practices is and protecting like our environment is also like a solution. And but that's often not profitable versus renewable energy is deeply profitable. So yeah, I guess that's like one example for question one. That's it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's quite interesting because no, I think you should to mute.
Yeah.
I can mute it. Yeah, that's an interesting part because I used to work in the solar powered pump renewable energy solutions in East Nusa Tenggara. Well, it is, yeah, certainly good, but how can we not erase this knowledge systems practices? Derek.
I kind of want to go off on that. I was thinking through like sort of like the sacred forest examples, and I think your example kind of like relates to what I was thinking about in the sense that it's not, on some level, it's not really the environment itself that we care about. It's not real nature. It's about like, well, that's a pretty glacier. I'm not going to be able to see that pretty glacier anymore. Well, if the earth boils, we'll all die. It's not about the earth, it's about us. Really, it's sort of mediated through us. And I'm not saying that's like necessarily a bad thing or anything. But it's like if you contrast it with sort of like the spiritual beliefs, it's that doesn't seem to be the case. It's not like, well, the forest is holy because if you treat the forest as holy, then humans will protect the forest. No, the forest is holy. It's like when you talk with religious people, some people have this understanding that like, why is religion there? Oh, because religion makes you moral. And if you ask a genuinely religious person, they'll say, a lot of them will say that doesn't make sense. It's not, I don't believe in God because he makes me moral. I believe in God because he is God. The forest is sacred because the forest is sacred. So I don't know. That was just sort of what I was wondering if you or anyone else had some thoughts on that.
Thank you, Derek. Anyone in the Zoom want to add comments on that note? Yeah, that's interesting.
I read this like I can speak really loudly as well.
Okay, I'll just sit
It's
here.
unimportant. It's just a thought, but I read this piece on decolonizing extinction once, and it actually like pulled a lot from like studies on orangutan. But it was also like it talked about how our like a lot of like conservation efforts is to protect humanity versus to actually like to actually like care about the world and the earth. And it's like, how do we save ourselves and save like the world that we live in? And so it's still putting the natural world in this position that we like it is of use of us. And so we want to save it from extinction because of us and not because like, as you said, because of like the world itself, which is like very interesting because then extinction itself can be colonial, at least the way we think about it.
Right. To sort of link it back to the earlier discussion sort of session, it sort of speaks to, again, our disconnect, right, with nature, where it's sort of like we can't think of nature without subordinating it to our own perspective almost. Like nature cannot exist as a thing in its own right almost. And that's sort of like what we were talking about previously.
Thank you. You were summarizing. It's good. Anyone in the Zoom? Probably 1%. Oh, it's 8:47. But no worries. We still have 10 more modules. Anyone in the Zoom wants to add something? 1% probably. Yes, Chutwan Tisani Pasha.
It reminds me like in Aceh, several trees are protected because they are, let's say, they are an important tree to mark the graves of some big ulama. And then while other trees are like easily cutting down by the government, And thus some type of, I feel like this type of spiritual pressure is actually needed in a way that it can create some, I'm not sure whether I can say it's fear or more like the sense of belonging to that place in a very deep level where not everyone can relate anymore in the current modern world, because basically with the revolution industry and stuff like that, the environment start changing. Maybe first, like on the first millennia of human civilization, we start building for gods. That's why there are so many temples and stuff. And then next one, we start building for human. And now in the current world, we start looking back and then see how bad it is if we don't try to balance with the nature and stuff. But then it will be, I feel like it will be tricky to put it in education, since let's say Indonesian have so many religions and stuff like that. It might be the limitation there. And then there are beliefs that it becomes less scientific, but in a way this type of thing should be protected, and like the spiritual belief should be there, I guess, but there is a gap in between these two things.
Oh, thank you so much. We have Nasser.
So yeah, I mean, talking about the this kind of spiritual beliefs to protect environment, I feel like it can only work when the opposing, I mean, when the projects are small, right? When it faces a small project, but when it faces like a big project, such as like big mining, projects in a lot of places, it happens, and I don't think it works in facing those kind of projects. And I feel like uh, either the government or those companies that do those kind of projects don't really care about how the indigenous people or the local people think about their projects. And um, in the outer side, they can say that they have obtained consent for it, but consent can be fabricated, and it happens in a lot of mining sites in Indonesia. And I still don't know how to, solve that kind of problem. So yeah, I mean, it's just I'm sorry for ending it in a really sad note, but that's just what I keep thinking. And I'm currently also working on that kind of research. So it's just been really bugging my mind. So yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing. And yeah, that's sad, but that's the reality, and we should talk about it. And that should be taught in education as well, starting from early. And yeah, because it's 8:51, let's continue. I'll be fast. So yeah, there's a distinctive dimension of indigenous education in Indonesia, because it involves the embodiment of cosmologies and philosophical principles in the spatial and architectural organization of settlements. We can see there's a lot of this kind of understanding. So for example, in the Senaru village, they have the solar philosophy where the village is oriented to the Mount Rinjani, where ancestral spirits reside. It is an imaginary cosmic line that connects the village to sacred mountains. There's Saga village, there's Trunyan village, but I think we will talk more about this in a specific module. I hope Arimbi can talk more because she's doing her PhD in this indigenous architecture here in New York, in New School. So I'll skip this. I hope he can talk more. She can talk more, sorry. This is the settlements as living curriculum. Yeah, I think we can skip this as well. Rituals, educational transmission. Yeah, I think we can just look through this. Oh, for example, probably one of my point in the previous spatial architectural thing is, it is really advanced. So if you ever go to Noguchi Museum in Queens, they will introduce you to how Isamu Noguchi connects like one installation about the solar, how it connects through small doors into like a sun installation, etc. And there's like this understanding, blah blah blah. But if you look into how this villages works, how they have like these 3 layers in Saga Village, how they orient to this lake in Chunyan and the Mount Rinjani. It is really advanced and very deep. So we can try to look at it. It's like feng shui architecture in China, in Chinese architecture. Not architecture, like urban planning. Yeah, you know what I mean. And I think, yeah, we can read this. Rituals as educational transmission. So beyond settlement patterns, indigenous educational systems are maintained through elaborate ritual practices that constitute living performance of cosmological understanding and social obligations. There's house rituals dedicated to rebuilding involve offerings to spiritual masters, recognizing relationships that place living humans in subordinate positions vis-a-vis superior spiritual forces. There's ceremonial learning in Manggarai, where Watwai ceremony teaches through participation. Children learn their place within lineage, extending to ancestors, their obligation to community. It is not necessary, but we can still call it obligation to community, and that spiritual forces oversee their journeys. We have the cosmic maintenance. Rituals are understood as essential to the very existence and flourishing of society. Yeah, this is already summarizing everything up until now. We should have pedagogical transformation in education. We should try to center more than human relations. We should recognize that the well-being of human communities is intimately connected with the well-being of more than human communities. Our learning must attend to how do these ways of knowing contribute to the thriving of all beings, not only human. Second, restore spiritual dimensions. We should create a space for students to engage existential and ethical dimension of environmental questions. Spiritual engagement is not opposed to effective stewardship. Third, engage community practices. Center, gotong royong system, arisan pendidikan, skills pedagogy, etc. as foundational educational structures through which communities transmit values and knowledge. Because it's been there for hundreds, for thousands of years. Why now you are swapping the students with new modern education, Western centric model? And the last one is ground in place. Education must move outdoors, be organized around local ecosystems, involve direct observation and engagement with more than human beings as teachers. Actually, one of the good examples is in the civic education, a lot of schools are going outside to aksi kamisan now. I really like those sessions where these progressive teachers go out. And also going study tour to where in Jakarta. We don't have much parks. Yeah, we can look at it. There are some challenges, of course. Schools are colonial institutions designed to discipline and assimilate not only IB schools, not only Cambridge schools, but also public schools in general. We have the state-controlled curriculum. Fadli Zone will change everything. Second, institutionalized schooling involves epistemic erasure that silences indigenous worldviews. The third challenge is indigenous communities face pressures from globalization and market integration. And the last one, transforming formal schooling, requires reimagining what schooling is for. To sum up the session, this final reflection. We can skip this. So yeah, this is what I'm trying to make us reflect after this session. 1.5 hours. It should be 1 hour. Education for cosmic balance. The crisis facing our world call for transform education grounded in radically different understandings of human belonging and responsibility, where indigenous cosmologies and pedagogies over essential resources for such transformation. There are four key elements that are not only being introduced in the First Nation community, indigenous people in Canada, not only in the Native Americans, but we can try to see it in our own communities in Indonesia. We have land-based pedagogies centering place-specific learning with and for more than human teachers in direct engagement with ecosystems. For examples, if you're learning about physics in East Nusa Tenggara, fluid mechanics, you will learn about toiletries. What is it? Pispot. Pispot bahasa Inggris apa? Yeah, that example to teach people about mechanics fluid. Bro, they don't have any toiletries. They don't have anything. So how can we focus on their place? How can education be more connected to them, to their land as well, to teach about the clean water crisis in NTT? Then we have collective consciousness, cultivating social practices that build solidarity and mutual responsibility. We have socio-political action, orienting education toward justice and the defense of all life through transformative practice. The last one, relational epistemologies, recognizing indigenous knowledge systems as sophisticated and urgently needed alternatives to colonial models. So to conclude, in centering indigenous cosmologies, we create possibilities for futures where humans, waters, land, spirits, and all our more than human relations thrive together through education grounded in reciprocity, respect, and recognition of our fundamental interdependence. So that's what I'm trying to make us think about how the problem in our education system, how is it like in the indigenous communities, and how can we recenter the recentering the margin. Okay, there are some comments in the Zoom. I'll read from Kak Ria. When I was a child, I learned how to respect nature was from children's story. One of them was Enid Blyton. My school or even my parents' religion never taught me how to respect environment and nature. On other way, when I become mom, I teach my children to love nature, environment, animals by accompanying them watching National Geographic Channel or sometimes anime and other animation movies. That's because their school didn't teach that specifically. After they become adults, they read a lot and learn from their universities. Yeah, it is a well-needed approach. Because until when we are going to learn about all of these things while the real situation is crazier, the ecological destruction. And thank you, very informative. Learn a ton and have a lot of reflecting to do. Yeah, I hope everyone after this doesn't stop here, tries to reflect. When you go outside from this room, you are seeing the very cold weather. Why is it very cold in the early November? How does it happen? See the trees in Colombia or people outside. Look towards the more than human beings and how can we relate more and make ourselves interconnected with them. So I think that's it. We already take too much time. Actually. Okay. We have a really interesting session next week. We will have a guest, right? Wait, let me check. Okay, so next week it is November 14. Yeah, we will have a guest from UI, Mas Gegerianto. We'll talk about land as relations and strategies. So we will go back to the morning time in New York next week. It's going to be on Zoom, no in person. And it will be at 7:30 a.m. in Weibe. Oh no, in New York time, and 7 p.m. on Weibe, or 8 p.m. in Wita, or 9 p.m. at WIT. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's it for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, and see you next week. We still have 10 more modules about indigenous, and we will have a lot of guests as well. So I hope we are keep reflecting always. And yeah, see you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.